Welcome to this topical discussion for the Hanan Brief. In this video session, we will examine a fundamental question in international relations. Why does the possession of nuclear weapons trigger conventional war and systemic instability? While standard realist theory holds that nuclear weapons deter major conflicts through mutually assured destruction, modern geopolitical data suggests a different reality. Let's start with the core structural reasons.
The primary driver is the security dilemma under an anarchic international system. Because there is no global governing authority, states must ensure their own survival. When State A acquires nuclear weapons for self-defense, State B cannot verify that intent. State B perceives this as an offensive threat and reacts by increasing its own military readiness, which accelerates regional instability.
This dynamic becomes critical during what defense analysts call the vulnerability window. This is the developmental phase before a state achieves a survivable second strike capability. During this window, rival states face a strong structural incentive to launch a preemptive conventional strike to destroy the nuclear infrastructure before it becomes operational.
Once the weapons are operational, we observe the stability-instability paradox. Data shows that while nuclear weapons make all-out war between major powers too costly, they actually encourage lower-level conventional conflicts. Because a nuclear-armed state feels insulated from total invasion, it is more likely to engage in aggressive regional actions, or proxy wars, gambling that its rivals will back down to avoid nuclear escalation.
Under active crisis conditions, this translates into a use-it-or-lose-it dilemma. If military command systems indicate that their nuclear launch sites are vulnerable to a first strike, leadership experiences severe pressure to launch their weapons immediately. This compresses the timeline for diplomatic communication from days to mere minutes.
This compressed timeline is further complicated by the deployment of low-yield tactical nuclear weapons. Unlike strategic missiles designed for total destruction, tactical nuclear weapons are integrated into standard battlefield units. This blurs the boundary between conventional and non-conventional warfare, significantly lowering the threshold for nuclear deployment if conventional forces face defeat.
Operationally, we must also account for technical miscalculations and early warning failures. Historical records show numerous instances where radar glitches, computer malfunctions, or satellite sensor errors falsely reported incoming missiles. During heightened political tension, such technical errors can easily cause a state to launch a mistaken retaliatory strike.
Today, cyber warfare introduces an additional layer of unpredictability. A cyber attack targeting a state's command and control network, or spoofing data to simulate an unauthorized launch, can trigger defensive military actions. The constant threat of digital sabotage creates an environment of permanent suspicion.
This suspicion causes a regional domino effect. Proliferation is rarely isolated. When one nation develops nuclear capabilities, its geographic neighbors often abandon their non-proliferation commitments to balance the regional distribution of power. This increases the total number of nuclear actors and the mathematical probability of a conflict.
We also see states using brinkmanship strategies. Conventionally weaker nations frequently use aggressive nuclear rhetoric and missile tests to force economic or political concessions from larger adversaries. This strategy assumes that all actors will remain perfectly rational under stress, which is a highly volatile assumption.
Furthermore, the erosion of international arms control treaties has removed key verification and inspection mechanisms. Without transparent data regarding a rival's actual arsenal size, military planners consistently prepare for worst-case scenarios, shifting their military posture to a wartime footing.
This is compounded by dual-capable delivery vehicles. Modern hypersonic cruise missiles can carry either conventional or nuclear warheads. When a missile is launched during a crisis, the receiving nation cannot instantly determine the payload. Defense doctrines often dictate treating the incoming threat as nuclear, forcing an immediate, non-conventional response.
On the domestic front, leaders sometimes exploit their nuclear status during internal political or economic crises. By staging military displays or using nationalistic rhetoric, regimes attempt to consolidate domestic power. This locks governments into rigid positions, making diplomatic compromise difficult.
Additionally, extended deterrence commitments draw major powers into localized disputes. When a nuclear superpower extends its nuclear umbrella to non-nuclear allies through mutual defense pacts, its security becomes tied to regional border friction. A minor conflict between non-nuclear states can escalate into a direct superpower confrontation.
We must also acknowledge that human decision-making is not always perfectly rational. Data shows that high stress, physical exhaustion, and cognitive biases severely impair leadership during international crises. If leaders operate based on misinformation or ideological dogmatism, rational deterrence models fail entirely.
Finally, the integration of artificial intelligence into early warning systems presents unique risks. AI algorithms processing strategic data at high speeds can misinterpret ambiguous troop movements as preparations for an attack. If an autonomous protocol initiates a pre-launch sequence, human operators have very little time to halt the escalation.
Let's look at the specific historical and ongoing conflicts that have been triggered or escalated by nuclear possession. A clear example of the stability-instability paradox is the Kargil War in 1999. 1 year after both India and Pakistan conducted successful nuclear tests in 1998, Pakistani forces crossed the line of control. Both sides engaged in a conventional war, gambling that their nuclear capabilities would prevent a full-scale invasion, though it brought the region to a high alert status.
In Europe, the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war demonstrates how nuclear possession is used as an offensive shield. Russia utilizes its massive strategic arsenal to deter direct Western military intervention, allowing it to conduct a large-scale conventional war against a non-nuclear neighbor. This shows that nuclear weapons can actively facilitate conventional aggression by paralyzing external states.
In the Middle East, the preventative war dynamic is highly evident. Following verified reports from the International Atomic Energy Agency regarding high levels of uranium enrichment, preemptive strikes have been launched against nuclear installations. These actions directly demonstrate that the pursuit of nuclear capabilities can serve as an immediate trigger for kinetic warfare.
The Korean Peninsula remains an active flashpoint. North Korea's development of intercontinental ballistic missiles has forced South Korea and Japan to increase their conventional military readiness and expand joint military exercises with the United States. In this restricted geographic space, any localized skirmish carries a continuous risk of escalating into a wider conflict.
Even during the Cold War, the struggle for nuclear dominance drove major proxy conflicts. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 brought the United States and the Soviet Union to the edge of direct war because the deployment of Soviet nuclear missiles to Cuba disrupted the regional balance of power, showing that the physical relocation of nuclear assets is treated as a strategic provocation.
This brings us to our final topic: why the United States consistently targets nations developing or possessing nuclear weapons. Alex, what is the primary grand strategy driving this behavior?
The primary objective is the preservation of global freedom of action and conventional military dominance. When a regional power acquires nuclear weapons, it establishes an effective deterrent. This deterrent prevents the United States from using its conventional military forces to enforce foreign policy goals, execute regime changes, or protect economic interests in that region.
From an institutional standpoint, Washington focuses on enforcing the Non-Proliferation Treaty framework. The U.S. views unauthorized nuclear acquisition as a direct challenge to the rules-based international order. If proliferation continues unchecked, it fears a global cascade where dozens of states develop independent arsenals, eroding American global influence.
Alliance credibility is another major factor. The United States has binding mutual defense treaties to protect allies like NATO members, Japan, and South Korea. When a hostile state develops nuclear weapons, it directly threatens these allies. The U.S. must counter the proliferating nation to demonstrate that its extended deterrence commitments remain valid.
We must also consider the threat of strategic blackmail. If an adversarial regime develops functional intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of reaching the American mainland, it gains immense diplomatic leverage. The United States targets these programs to prevent a reality where its foreign policy choices can be paralyzed by a direct threat to an American city.
Lastly, U.S. defense doctrine focuses on the risk of command breakdown or loose nukes. In economically fragile or politically unstable regimes, there is a risk that nuclear materials could be diverted, stolen, or sold to non-state actors. Because non-state actors cannot be deterred by traditional threats of retaliation, the U.S. uses sanctions, cyber sabotage, and military posturing to neutralize these programs before a security breach occurs.
That concludes our comprehensive analysis for today. The data demonstrates that while nuclear weapons alter the calculations of war, their possession introduces severe structural risks that can actively trigger and escalate global conflicts.
Thank you for listening. See you in the next topic of the Houghton Brief.